welcome to the debate. Imagine a towering concrete dam, right? Holding back just a massive reservoir. And you look closely and you can see water seeping through these hairline fractures in the concrete.
Yeah, never a good sign.
No, exactly. And the engineers at the top are completely deadlocked. One group, well, they want to inject a highly specialized, really expensive epoxy into the cracks to just hold the structure together while water continues to flow through the turbines.
Right. And the other group is looking at those exact same cracks and concluding that the structural integrity is it's already compromised. I mean, they argue that the only responsible choice is to open the emergency spillways, drain the reservoir to a safe level, and fundamentally rebuild the concrete, even if it means flooding the valley below.
Exactly. And look, that isn't some hypothetical. That is Thames Water right now. We are looking at a utility serving, 16 million people.
Yeah, 16 million.
And it just drew down the final 677 million pounds of a 3 billion pound emergency debt facility that provides a cash runway only until the last quarter of 2026. And, hovering over all of this is a statutory net debt of 18.5 billion pounds.
Which is just a staggering number.
It really is. So the central question we are exploring today is this. When an essential utility can no longer function normally, what is the proper path forward? I look at this scenario and I see a clear case for a creditor-led recapitalization to preserve value and prevent the disruption of insolvency.
And I view it from a completely different angle, honestly. I argue that a court-mandated process known as the special administration regime is entirely necessary to stabilize essential services, even if it forces major losses on the lenders.
Okay, well, to really understand this, I think we need to unpack how a private creditor-led rescue actually works in practice. Because the senior creditors have brought forward a recapitalization plan through a vehicle called London and Valley Water.
Right.
We are talking about injecting 3.35 billion pounds in new equity and up to 6.55 billion pounds in new debt, alongside a substantial reduction in existing liabilities.
Yeah, but
let me just finish this thought. This private restructuring keeps the utility out of the courts. You avoid the chaos of an insolvency process, which inherently destroys the value of the underlying business. It is the most rational path to stabilize the utility while honoring the financial contracts that, built its infrastructure in the first place.
look, I hear you, but heavy borrowing routinely hides fundamental operational weakness until refinancing becomes completely impossible. And that is exactly what we are witnessing here.
You think they're hiding it?
I think a rescue plan that relies heavily on adding 6.5 billion pounds in new debt to an organization that already owes 18.5 billion pounds simply delays the crisis. I mean, it kicks the can down the road. The Special Administration Regime, or SAR, is unavoidable because we have to ensure that operations, specifically fixing leaks and reducing extreme pollution, are prioritized over protecting lenders. We just cannot allow a financial engineering patch to take precedence over the fundamental public duty of a water utility.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop you there because 18.5 billion pounds, as we said, is a massive number. For the listener trying to wrap their head around this, how does a water company even accumulate that much debt when their customers are legally required to pay them every single month?
Right.
It seems counterintuitive that a monopoly could find itself on the brink of collapse.
Well, that is the crucial context here. Water utilities are often structured using highly leveraged financial models. Decades ago, investors looked at the utility and realized that, hey, because people will always need water, the revenue is practically guaranteed.
Sure.
So based on that predictable income, they borrowed massive amounts of money against the physical assets, the pipes, the treatment plants, often to pay out dividends, assuming interest rates would just stay near zero forever.
Ah, right. The zero interest rate phenomenon.
Exactly. But inflation hit. The cost of running the business skyrocketed. Then the cost of borrowing jumped. Suddenly, that guaranteed income wasn't enough to cover the monthly debt payments, let alone fix the aging pipe network. So the debt compounds and the physical infrastructure degrades because there isn't enough cash left over for maintenance.
I completely acknowledge that historical mechanism, but we have to deal with the reality on the ground today. The creditors are not just blindly throwing good money after bad. We have to scrutinize whether the math of this new proposal truly supports long-term operational health. And, well, I argue it does.
How so?
Well, that £3.35 billion equity injection is a vital lifeline. It represents real capital coming in to keep the utility running. Let's translate what they're actually proposing. This involves a debt for equity exchange.
Right.
In plain English, a debt for equity exchange means the lenders agree to tear up a portion of the IOUs Thames Water owes them. In return, they get ownership shares in the company. They trade the right to be paid back for the right to own the house. It recalibrates the balance sheet.
But look at the sheer scale of the other side of that ledger. Yes, they swap some debt for equity, but the plan also includes handing the company up to £6.55 billion in new debt.
As part of a broader restructuring, yes.
You are taking a house that is already underwater on its mortgage and telling the homeowner that the solution is to take out an entirely new, massive loan to fix the roof. The cost of servicing that new debt will take priority over everything else.
I hear that concern, but let me offer a different analogy for what a negotiated restructuring accomplishes. Think of Thames Water as a marathon runner dealing with a severe muscle tear mid-race. A negotiated restructuring is like having a physical therapist jump onto the course, taping the leg, adjusting the stride, and providing immediate fuel so the runner can keep moving.
Okay.
Forcing them into a court process, which is what special administration effectively is, guarantees those muscles will atrophy. The entire operation halts while lawyers and bureaucrats figure out what to do. How can you view £3.35 billion of fresh equity as anything but a positive step for immediate liquidity?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that marathon analogy. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Your physical therapist analogy assumes the runner just needs a quick patch to finish the race. But this runner has a compound fracture. Putting them into the special administration regime isn't sending them to the hospital to atrophy. It's putting the house in foreclosure so a new owner can actually afford to fix the plumbing, rather than just forcing the current owner to take out a third mortgage.
But a foreclosure destroys the value of the house.
Listen, government scrutiny has correctly highlighted the severe risks embedded in this private recapitalization plan. Restructuring an £18.5 billion debt pile involves massive transaction fees. Hundreds of millions of pounds go to investment bankers, lawyers, and advisors.
Well, that's standard.
Standard or not, that money gets siphoned right out of the liquidity pool. Ultimately, who bears the burden of those costs? The customers. The math simply does not support long-term health when the immense cost of capital neutralizes the cash injection.
Look, transaction fees are a reality of any corporate restructuring, absolutely. But they pale in comparison to the value destroyed during a protracted court-mandated administration process. When a company enters a formal insolvency process, its contracts are disrupted, its credit rating vanishes, and its ability to operate efficiently just plummets.
Temporarily, yes.
You argue that the private rescue is a temporary accounting fix, but I argue that the state-mandated alternative is far more destructive. Let's stick with your foreclosure idea, because if you foreclose on this house, the entire neighborhood is going to panic. What actually happens when the government steps in and triggers SAR? You are introducing an enormous variable that the market cannot price.
Well, let's clarify what the special administration regime actually is mechanically, because there is a lot of misconception around it.
Okay.
SAR is not permanent nationalization. The government does not simply seize the company forever. It is a targeted, temporary period of public control designed specifically to facilitate a restructuring, transfer, or sale while keeping essential services running.
Right. By an administrator.
Over the company with one primary legal directive: keep the water flowing and the environment safe. Yes, under SAR, senior and junior creditors will likely face major losses. They will take severe haircuts. But those losses aren't arbitrary. They reflect the true changed value of the debt based on current regulatory realities.
But you are vastly underestimating the chilling effect this would have on the broader market. I mean, if creditors take massive state-mandated haircuts in SAR, the consequences extend far beyond Thames Water. Future borrowing costs for every single piece of infrastructure in the UK will skyrocket.
Wait, why should borrowing costs skyrocket simply because bad debt was accurately priced?
Because capital is incredibly sensitive to regulatory overreach. If lenders see that their carefully negotiated security can be wiped out by a court order because the government decides the utility needs a reset, they will demand an enormous risk premium on the next power plant, the next toll road, the next broadband network.
Right, a risk premium.
Yes, a risk premium means lenders will say, since the government might step in and cancel my debt, I am going to charge you 8% interest instead of 4%. That extra 4% gets passed directly to the public through higher bills for decades.
That is a compelling argument, I'll admit. But capital is also supposed to price in fundamental risk, including the risk of regulatory enforcement. Lenders provided £18.5 billion to a utility. They knew it was a regulated monopoly.
Sure, and the regulations dictate that environmental standards must be met, and leaks must be fixed. If the company cannot meet those standards and simultaneously service its debt, it means the lenders made a poor risk assessment. Shielding them from the consequences of that poor assessment distorts the free market just as much as government intervention does.
That's a strong claim.
If we constantly bail out bad lending through private accounting tricks, lenders will never properly evaluate the operational health of the infrastructure they are funding.
Even if we accept that lenders misjudged the risk, and I'm not saying they did, SAR leaves a massive gaping vacuum of uncertainty. The central question remains completely unresolved under your model. Who carries the ultimate cost of this failure?
Well,
Is it the investors who get wiped out? Is it the lenders taking a haircut? Is it the customers through higher bills? Or is it the taxpayers who have to fund the temporary public control while the administrator figures things out? Special administration doesn't answer that question.
I disagree.
It just shifts the battleground into a courtroom where administrators who have no long-term financial stake in the company make decisions. A negotiated settlement, by contrast, explicitly defines who takes what loss and who provides what capital, all agreed upon contractually before execution.
See, the uncertainty you are pointing out in SAR is a feature, not a bug.
A feature?
Yes. It allows an independent administrator to objectively assess the viability of the physical assets without being beholden to the sunk cost fallacies of the existing lenders. A negotiated settlement defines those losses, sure, but it does so in a way that inherently prioritizes the lenders who are sitting at the table.
They are the ones providing the capital.
But customers and taxpayers don't get a seat in that private boardroom. The legal waterfall in a standard corporate restructuring dictates that secured lenders get paid first. Special administration flips that paradigm. It puts the public interest, the continuation of essential water services and environmental protection, at the very top of the priority list. The financial waterfall comes second.
I agree entirely that the continuation of services is paramount. In fact, the legislation demands that services continue regardless of who owns the company or how the debt is restructured.
Exactly.
But maintaining those services requires continuous capital expenditure. Buying chemicals, replacing pipes, upgrading software, all of this requires cash flow. My primary concern is that while SAR protects the physical flow of water, it completely halts the flow of private capital.
Okay, but if we agree that cash flow is the lifeblood of the operation, we have to look at who gets hurt first when the money runs out. Because while we debate billions at the top, the real victims of this financial instability are the people actually fixing the pipes, the local contractors and the supply chain.
That's a fair point.
This brings up a critical lesson for any business dealing with a distressed customer right now. You must evaluate cash flow, not just revenue and assets.
Absolutely. That is a vital point for anyone operating in the credit space or managing a supply chain. Thames Water is a massive organization. It has an enormous physical footprint, millions of paying customers, and huge revenue streams.
Yeah.
So, on paper, evaluating their assets might make them look like a fortress. A supplier might think, well, they have 16 million customers who have to pay their water bill every month. Of course, they are good for a £50,000 invoice.
Exactly. But that heavy borrowing conceals the fact that all that revenue is already spoken for. The cash comes in from the customers, and it goes straight out the door to service the debt.
Right out the door.
Suppliers and contractors, whether they are providing IT services, heavy machinery for pipe maintenance, or, daily chemical supplies for water treatment. should never increase their exposure simply because the debtor is a large, well-known organization. When dealing with an entity in this much distress, suppliers must review their payment terms meticulously. They need to monitor overdue invoices and understand their exact legal standing. Because if SAR is triggered, those suppliers often find themselves categorized as unsecured creditors.
Right. And for clarity, being an unsecured creditor means you have provided goods or services without requiring collateral.
Right.
So if you sell a fleet of vans to a company and hold a lien on the vans, you are a secured creditor. If you provide consulting services and just hand them a bill with a 30-day payment window, you are unsecured. If the company goes into an administration process, the secured creditors have a legal claim to the assets. The unsecured creditors go to the very bottom of the priority list.
Yep.
They only get paid if there is money left over after everyone else takes their share, which usually means they receive pennies on the pound, if anything at all.
Precisely. And that is a terrifying prospect for thousands of small and medium businesses relying on Thames Water for their livelihood.
I fully agree with your assessment of the severe risks to the supply chain, but honestly, I use that exact reality to reinforce my initial position.
How so?
Because delayed action and insolvency destroy recovery options for everyone. A swift, negotiated private settlement is vastly superior. If Thames Water goes into special administration, everything freezes. The administrators take over, and those unsecured suppliers we just discussed are left waiting months, perhaps years, to find out what fraction of their invoices they might recover.
That's assuming the private settlement actually holds.
But a private restructuring, executed quickly outside of a courtroom, preserves the organization as an active going concern. It ensures that the operational budget remains intact and suppliers continue to get paid on time. The corporate structure must survive to generate the cash to repay both the debt and the operational expenses. Destroying the corporate structure through SAR harms the very suppliers you are trying to protect.
That is a compelling argument on its face. But have you considered that a flawed private rescue could be even worse for those suppliers over the long term?
In what way?
Let's trace the mechanics of what happens if your recapitalization plan goes through. If £6.55 billion in new debt is piled onto the company, the squeeze on operational cash flow will only intensify. The company will be forced to aggressively manage its working capital to service that new massive debt load.
Explain what you mean by aggressively managing working capital in this context.
It means they will look for any possible way to hold on to cash for as long as possible. Typically, that means stretching out payment terms to suppliers to the absolute legal maximum.
Oh, I see.
A 30-day payment term becomes 60 days. Then they push it to 90 days, then 120 days. For a small contractor, waiting 4 months to get paid for a job they already completed is a death sentence. A swift private settlement is only beneficial if it actually solves the underlying insolvency.
Right. But
If it just masks the insolvency with new debt, suppliers are being lured into a false sense of security. They might continue providing services, increasing their exposure right up until the point where the new debt burden becomes utterly unsustainable and the company collapses anyway. SAR forces a sharp, necessary pain up front, rather than dragging the entire supply chain through a slow-motion failure.
You know, it really comes down to a fundamental philosophical difference in how we view complex debt recovery and infrastructure finance. Debt collection, especially at this scale, is not just about demanding immediate payment in full or forcing a liquidation. It is about protecting the inherent value of an operational entity.
That's true.
It involves strategic negotiation, recalibrating balance sheets, and executing debt for equity exchanges. These financial tools exist exactly for situations like this. Thames Water highlights the profound tension between recovering capital and preserving the organization that must generate it. I continue to firmly believe that structured repayment arrangements and private recapitalization offer the best path to resolving £18.5 billion in liabilities without triggering a panic across the entire infrastructure sector.
And I maintain that formal insolvency procedures, like the special administration regime, were designed precisely for this exact moment. They exist to force a necessary reset when a utility fails its fundamental duties to the public and the environment.
It is not about punishing lenders out of spite. It is about recognizing that regulation and physical reality can and do change a debt's intrinsic value.
Well, we definitely see that differently.
When liquidity has fallen to the point where an emergency facility is completely exhausted and the company remains under intense scrutiny over profound operational failures, protecting the corporate shell cannot take priority over the physical infrastructure itself.
Right. Well, we certainly find convergence on a few critical points today. Early intervention is absolutely critical in these scenarios. Delayed action universally reduces recovery options for everyone involved, from the largest bondholders to the smallest local contractors.
Agreed.
We also agree that regulation directly impacts the underlying value of corporate debt, particularly in monopolies like water supply. The physical realities of the pipe network dictate the financial realities of the balance sheet.
We do agree on those fundamentals. Where we remain deadlocked is on the execution of the rescue. We disagree on whether maintaining creditor value through a private, highly leveraged recapitalization or enabling temporary state control to force a fundamental restructure yields the best long-term outcome for the 16 million people relying on the utility.
Absolutely.
The distribution of those eventual losses, whether they ultimately fall on investors, lenders, or the customers themselves, will set a massive precedent.
It is a precedent that will shape how heavily indebted UK infrastructure businesses balance their public duties with their private liabilities for decades to come. Let's think back to that massive concrete dam we discussed at the start of the show. The water is still seeping through the cracks. The engineers are still arguing whether to patch the walls with expensive private capital or to open the floodgates and let the state mandate a structural rebuild.
And the clock is ticking.
Exactly. Both choices carry immense risk, and the clock is ticking toward the final quarter of 2026. The tension between recovering what is owed and preserving the very structure that holds the water back remains unresolved.